Now, it wasn't that long ago that I was standing in an almost identical spot talking about the previous generation Mazda CX-5. Now, if you're a shopper, you're in the fray, in the jungle, looking for a new SUV or CUV, it can be about as entertaining as dealing with a nasty flare-up of hemorrhoids. Now, over this past year, I've had numerous communications via email, social media, facsimile, all to my AOL account saying, we saw your previous CX-5 video and it was helpful to us in order to make a decision on a new car. Well, I think that's extremely strange. I think it has to do more with the awareness of that. The CX-5 doesn't sell as many as the competitors. And it's an interesting question as to why, considering some of the absolute junk and turds that are on the market. Now, talking about the exterior of CUVs and SUVs can be about as exciting as writing your name on the chalkboard in grade school a million times. There's just not much variation between the models. In the case of Mazda, we'll talk about this soul red metallic paint color. Doesn't matter what car they put it on, it looks great. You won't find too many people that said, oh, that color's kind of just bland. And it's a testament to just what choosing cool colors can do for the personality of a car. The second part is they've changed the front end. You have much more aggressive, more upscale looking headlight design with the LED integration is just really smooth. The front bumper and the front grille is just still a contention of argument. It is massive. But one thing I really like, and this is kind of geeky, is the front mesh grille kind of rips off or is inspired by magnetic ferrofluid. I don't know if that's what they were going for, but that's exactly what it looks like to me, and I like it. Now, the contrast or the negative side of that is good luck trying to clean that when it's massacred full of bugs. Now, chances are you're going to be spending a lot of time with this vehicle. It's going to be your daily driver for at least 3 years. Styling, for the most part, is one of the least offensive parts about it. When you get along the side, it looks extremely smooth. There is nothing overly aggressive. There's not a lot of kinks or crinkles or ridiculous character lines that go along the side, and it's one of the things that makes it flow extremely well for a CUV of this type. Now, there are some other interesting design elements on the side of the CX-5, one that Turbowski noticed, and that is the use of chrome along the lower parts of the windows. Now, that design trend doesn't follow along the roofline. It's this piano gloss plastic along the whole top. And what this does is it creates an optical illusion that the roofline is lower, or it gives it that floating design. One of the last few things to talk about with the side of the CX-5 is something your grandmother and drug dealer will appreciate: the wheel design. And Mazda does an extremely good job on most of their vehicles with having this gunmetalish darker rim color, and that helps. Just they don't always look dirty from brake dust, and sometimes they're easier to clean as well. The last thing to note is, well, this lovely unpainted black plastic trim. And on a red car, well, it doesn't look all that bad, but there sure seems to be a lot of it. So we're finally here, the rump of the CX-5. And again, this is one of the best aspects of this car. It has a very sleek, very cohesive design in the back without resorting to any gimmicks. It doesn't look like somebody did a bunch of hallucinogenics or got their head beat in before they sketched this out. It's extremely clean and it flows with the rest of the car. It doesn't look like somebody else designed the back. But again, that's subjective. We'll move on to something that's not. And Mazda heard me on the previous review and they said, you know what, we don't care what he thinks. We're putting on a automated lift gate. And This thing goes up and down real nice and slow, and I feel like I'm gonna be about 80 years old by the time it goes up and down. But this is something that people wanted, so that's why it was added. So what the benefit of that is you can plan ahead. If you use your little remote, you can open it before you even get here, and you don't have to worry about waiting like I constantly complain about. Now, one of the most critical parts of buying a CUV or an SUV is the storage space, the capacity. And while the CX-5 isn't the largest in its segment, it is extremely usable. Once you take off this cross beam, which depending on if you have it or not, you can fit so much stuff in here. Now, my third ex-wife was an exotic dancer. I never got to see one of her shows, but boy, did I have to haul her poles around. And this thing, I could load it up with so many poles, my head, your head would spin, actually. So when you get into this, I want to tell you something. Don't take my word for it. Don't take anybody's word for it. This is one thing you have to go to a dealership for and look at yourself. If you have a ton of crap that you're hauling around, if you're a hoarder, you need to see this in person and compare it to the competition. Other than that, it's been a totally usable space for me. I can fit all my crap in here with little or no fuss. The CX-5, Scott, 2017. This is new, although it doesn't look particularly new underneath.
It looks like every other car.
Well, I'm talking more about the Mazda, the previous generation CX-5. Okay. In the reality, this is still the same architecture as the previous generation CX-5. So they have made some adjustments for the new model aside from the exterior, and that's what we're going to talk about underneath. You still have, attempts at aerodynamics. The front is, is really smooth up front. You have access panels here to get to your service items, such as your oil filter and drain plug, which has...
I don't understand why they do clips and bolts, screws,
I don't get it either, but there's something on the inside that still doesn't make sense after 5 years of not having a covered dead pedal either. So I think some of these...
Or a screen sticking out of your dash.
Well, that's your favorite. So there's little things here. I like that the fact that they have a panel, you don't have to drop this whole thing down, but there's little strange things like the snap clips and the fasteners and the screws. But we're not going to talk about all of that, Scott. We're going to talk about the changes, and the changes are pretty simple. They had a big goal for the new CX-5, and that was improving upon the complaints of the previous generation. The owners had some issues with it. Number one, NVH. It was too noisy. Number two, it was a little bit too firm. Mm-hmm. They focused too much on handling and sacrificed ride quality, which in my opinion was one of the better aspects of the previous generation.
Yeah, but who the hell buys this for handling?
You hit the nail. No, well,
you would.
I would.
I only buy it how it handles. You gotta drive it with the race car at Redline all the time.
You're right. Okay, and that's... Mazda knows that. In order to sell more of these, they need to make the adjustments for the real person that buys them. Ride quality, NVH, and that's exactly what they fixed. And how did they do that, Scott?
Not sure.
Okay. The first thing they did, Scott, was they softened it up.
They put some KY jelly on all the bushings?
Well, almost. This rear, here, since you brought up the bushings, this rear control arm bushing is now fluid filled.
Ooh.
Okay? And you know why they fluid filled this rear?
Less friction.
No. You can't see it, but the steering rack is now hard mounted to the subframe. Mm. It used to have rubber isolators. So that's going to improve steering feel and overall handling and communication. But the trade-off is it creates more NVH. So to reduce that, they put fluid-filled bushings in the control arms to isolate it here instead of the steering rack. So you still get the good steering feel, but you isolate.
These look very traversious.
Oh.
That's been on there since 2010. I don't know if they're fluid-filled, but they look very familiar that we just had to replace because they never go bad. Mm-hmm.
The next thing you'll notice, Scott, is the dampers. You'll notice just visually the caster angle. They're running a more aggressive caster angle here, which helps to improve this, it's a huge focus on the CX-5 is steering.
Let's throw it on the alignment rack and check the specs.
We should, but we don't have time for that. You have a luncheon
I have activities.
at Jamba Juice?
Yeah.
Okay. All of this, the point is, they've fixed a lot of the problems that people complained about while improving upon what they already have. So they want to strike that balance for a regular person, not overly softening it, and then still kind of keeping some of the good dynamics.
Shouldn't that be the whole point from the beginning?
They went on the side of performance too much on the first CX-5.
It's an SUV.
Yeah, but Mazda still wants fun to drive DNA. And they're still trying to figure out that formula of what do people want.
This ain't fun to drive. It'll never be fun to drive.
So you were looking at the back of the CX-5, Scott. What were you saying?
That it looks like every other car in the back.
There is some truth to that. That when you get into this mass-produced segment of the same class of vehicles, you know, it's hard to reinvent the wheel.
Right. Use what works.
And that's exactly what they're doing here. The Mazda rear end, again, aside from little tiny tweaks, namely for NVH, you'll see the carpeted wheel well covers that help to reduce road noise. There's all these little things underneath that help quiet this down to make it a more quiet, refined driving experience. In the back, you still have the on-demand all-wheel drive system that I believe, from driving a lot of these, is definitely one of the better ones in terms of a driving experience. It tends to transfer power to the rear when it needs to more quickly than the other cars. You know, it's just not a total understeer fest when you're driving it, so it does make it a little bit more fun. They use a smaller differential, well, not a smaller differential, but it uses less fluid than some of the competitors to reduce pumping losses. There's a lot of little things here that they do for efficiency's sake and for performance. And I have to maintain, and I know you're going to say this, it continues to be one of the best riding and best handling CUVs in the segment for the price. I think you can put it up against the entry level like luxury CUVs and SUVs at this point. This is pretty safe, I think, to finance instead of lease. There's not, the complication level here isn't crazy enough where you have to worry about it like on a lot of the luxury cars. You could own this easily over the course of 5 to 7 years, and you know, you're in the Midwest, you're going to deal with rust, all the crap that you're going to deal with on every car, electronic parking brake crap. Now, I mean, there's going to be little things you're going to have to deal with on every car, but this doesn't scare me as much as some of the more higher end cars we've seen with air suspension.
That's the only way to go. I only look at air suspension cars.
Only?
Only. I need them to lower themselves when I open the door so I can get out.
You need the doors to self-close themselves too?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Scott? It's the 2.5 liter Sky Active motor we've seen over and over and over again.
It's like the 3.5 Toyota.
And there's a huge benefit of having the same motor in so many cars.
They all have the same problem when they break.
Exactly. And the parts availability is higher, all that stuff. And I'm not saying that this has any problems, but you know, when you get to a lot of these manufacturers that have 10 different motors, and you got to go through thumbing through a catalog of parts, and you say, oh, this car has 4 different alternator options. That's one of the benefits of Mazda having only 2 motors. But in this car, you only have a 2.5 liter. However, this is going to be one of the first, supposedly, to get the twin turbo diesel motor. Why they're putting a diesel in and not the 2.5 liter turbo is beyond me, because
so it can tow.
Yeah,
you got
that's true.
some torque.
What are you going to tow?
Some boats.
What, like a 5-footer?
My inflatable.
You're going to tow your paddle boat, your inflatable boat? All right, so really this is the same thing. They've made some minor mechanical changes to it, but it's the same power plant we've seen forever. Now, the things that they have changed in terms of drivability are twofold. One, they've adjusted the throttle mapping of this car. And you know, Mazda's big on this. They never talk about torque and power numbers, but they like to make little tweaks to power delivery so the throttle response is better. So they've changed a little bit of that. So this car will feel more lively when you're accelerating.
I feel lively out of the hole.
Yeah, out of the hole. Yeah, actually, that's what they changed. It gets off the line a little bit quicker, even though you're not going to notice any power difference. The second thing they changed was the transmission logic and shift logic more than anything. The car is more responsive. The transmission's more responsive, quicker to kind of hold gear. It holds gears longer, and it's quicker to kind of shift. And its shift logic and behavior is more refined and better than the previous transmission on the CX-5. And what that means is you're going to have a... What the hell did you do?
My shin on the unpainted plastic.
There's a lot of unpainted plastic on this car, much like the CX-9.
If it was painted, I probably would have seen it.
The brand new CX-5. And let's be real, this feels a lot like the previous generation version. But there are some critical things that have been updated that make a world of difference, at least for those who complained about the problems with the previous generation. That is sound isolation. This is far, far quieter than the previous generation. It's immediately noticeable on pretty much every road. All right, let's bring this thing to a stop. The CX-5 still has the same 2.5 liter, so it's not going to be any surprise that this is very similar to the previous generation. But let's launch it from a start and see how it goes here. I think one of the biggest things about this car is this is the big, you know, obviously acceleration has been the lacking point of most Mazdas. It's not that it's bad, it's not that it's going to be slow for most people, but it's lacking a lot of punch that plenty of the other competition have at this point. Steering feel has gotten even better, if you can believe that, especially for a CUV. This is by a long stretch the best in the segment. Handling, dynamics, all that stuff, I think they've gotten even better with this generation CX-5. Now, yes, this is not a sports car. It's not a sporty car. You're never going to drive it hardcore, but you can, and it doesn't totally fall apart. And I said that about the previous generation CX-5. You can go 80, 90%, and you don't feel like everything's a mess like plenty of the cars. Now, I said in my previous review of the last generation CX-5, I liked some of the visceral feel that you got from the road noise, the tire noise, the wind noise, and a lot of that has been replaced with solidity. And I think most people are really going to enjoy that. In fact, most people that complained, one of the biggest reasons why they didn't buy the CX-5 over the competitors was it was just too noisy overall. I think this puts the CX-5 near like luxury levels almost in terms of refinement. It's really a big difference. Now here's the reality. You know, when you get rid of all the enthusiast lingo, the engineering talk, the geeking out on the tech crap, this is what people have to do. An A to B drive where you don't get a lot of excitement, where things are just, you're stuck in traffic. And the times where you get to put your foot down and go through corners is few and far between. And obviously, that's the whole point of the CX-5, is it's supposed to help you get from point A to point B, have some enjoyment, feel like you're in a solid, really well put together vehicle, and then when you get out of it and you look at it, you're like, okay, well, it doesn't just look like every other turd on the road. Now, this segment is flooded, but there's things that kind of make you feel good when you drive the CX-5. And on a point A to point B ride, well, let's get into that. One of the most important parts of buying a vehicle like this is obviously you think about engine, transmission, styling, interior, all the things that people go for. One of the best parts about Mazda vehicles, and I repeat myself like a broken record with this, is the transmission. And it's because they've designed the torque converter to respond instantly. The programming is superb. So it responds in manual mode and even in automatic mode, more like a manual transmission, which means you can have more control over the transmission if you're shifting it manually. It responds quickly to upshifts. It lets you downshift very easily and responds almost like a dual clutch. I mean, it's not as fast, but it's pretty damn good for this segment. It's one of the best mainstream automatic transmissions because it really lets you kind of just have a little bit of fun, and daily commuting, it's just always in the right gear. You don't have 8 gears or 9 gears or 10 gears here. You have 6. And the benefit of that is in the real world, you're only going 65, 70. It always seems to be in the right gear. And in sport mode, basically what it does in automatic is it's always trying to find kind of that sweet spot where the transmission's in the right gear to give you the right amount of power. Now this is a naturally aspirated motor. It really is designed for efficiency. Most important. This is not a performance motor, but one of the benefits of having a naturally aspirated platform is, like the 4 cylinders of the past, you have to wind it out to get the power out of it, which means if you're used to turbocharged cars, you're going to be gravely disappointed in this because there's very little torque at the bottom end, even though they will claim that there's a lot more torque for a naturally aspirated motor. It just doesn't compare with the competition, and I'm okay with that for 2 reasons. One, you absolutely get better fuel economy than the competitive turbo models I've been in. 2, there's a sense of refinement and repeatability in its performance. I can slam this thing 0 to 60 10 times in a row and it feels exactly the same every time. The competitions with these eco turbos, you feel the power falling off more and more as you get more heat into it. You don't have that here. The fuel economy numbers, you can get pretty much high 20s, low 30s if you're really good on a, highway driving. In average driving for me, I'm getting about 27. Now, yes, if you pound the piss out of it, you're going to be in the low 20s. But again, that's something that you're going to have to adjust to depending on how you drive. The last 2 things to talk about with the new CX-5 is really, from a performance perspective, this does feel softer to me than the previous generation. And I think it's just partially trying to improve the ride quality. It doesn't feel as stiff. It feels more compliant over the bumps. And I can't really say it hurts the performance that much because it's really needed in a daily commute. So I really don't have a complaint there. The last thing that I would have to say is, and this is tied back to the 2.5 liter, they need the turbo motor in here absolutely as an option. Now this has to be said, if you're a previous generation CX-5 owner, should you be disappointed or should you run out and trade your car in for this? And the answer is absolutely not. Yes, there are subtle improvements, you would appreciate them, but unless you're 5 years into your previous car, I would wait. Now if you're a new shopper, obviously this is a really compelling package. It's not just about the driving experience, the steering, and some of the more mechanical aspects of this car. It's also about the interior space, the attention to detail, and the fact that Mazda has put a huge effort into making this a complete package. You can tell they care about attention to detail. They're just not trying to churn this out to, get as many sales as possible, although I'm sure they would also like that. But let's take a look at the interior space of the CX-5 and talk about some of the better parts of it. Yeah, Barry, do me a favor. Can you call Chuck? Let him know the hot tub's clogged up again. Yeah, Philip shaved his back and the things. Yeah, just call him. I'm talking about the CX-5 interior here. Thanks. Sorry about that. The CX-5 interior, it's one of the best interior spaces of really anything in its segment. And that is because Mazda understands attention to detail. This is an important vehicle to them. They have to separate themselves not only from the exterior, the mechanical design, they have to separate themselves here. And this is where it shows. Take a look at this side and center trim pieces. It's the synthetic material, but it has these interesting design elements in there. This almost copperish looking metallic filaments in it that kind of change direction and has different machining in it. It's just something you don't notice until you look at it up close, and it's such a great alternative to wood or fake wood or the plastic, like garbage wood trim that you see in a lot of like more budget cars. The stitching, the leather bits or pieces that feel like leather, it doesn't look like it came from a factory that designs junk for Walmart or the dollar store. It feels like a crafted interior space, something that you would find in an entry-level luxury car. Now, I'm not a super fan of the parchment leather or whitish leathers because they get dirty extremely quick. But if you can deal with that aspect and you option this car with it, it looks really good with how the contrasting of it works. It doesn't look just like a all black interior space. The other accents they use in here is this 3D vent design. It kind of comes out, it doesn't just look like a flat piece of plastic, it gives it this texture, a lot of just that, like the rings around the gauge cluster. There's just a three-dimensional aspect to all the knobs and switches in here which break up the blandness of so many cars. Now I'm going to shut this door, offer us a little bit more intimacy. The second thing is, if you hear those birds and they're annoying you, they're annoying me even more because I'm about to talk about something that grates on my nerves, and that is this piano gloss plastic on the center console in one of the most highest traffic areas of the car. And when you use this for a couple weeks, if you have kids in here that are just absolute maniacs that have their hands in McDonald's bags, or you get a passenger that is extremely sweaty and hairy, there's going to be a whole bunch of debris all over this area, and it looks gross. You have to constantly clean it. I wish they'd have some type of textured plastic here instead. But the bigger complaint after all these years, and I complained about it with my Mazda 3, is they still have not covered the dead pedal. How, with all this attention to detail, the fancy pants stitching, the alloy looks, the 3D vents, all the crap that they put in here, you can't spend 50 cents and put a plastic dead pedal cover over here? Have you never operated this thing in winter before, in the salt, in the Midwest, to see what it does to carpet? The last thing to talk about is infotainment, and this is the standardized system you're seeing in every single Mazda car, and it really hasn't changed much since its inception. The design interface is simple, the command knob structure works well, the menu structure works well, it's quick to get around, there's not a lot of lag, but there are a couple problems with it now as it is aged. One, you don't have the Android software support or the Apple support still into this head unit, and it's really strange to me given its Unix roots. The second thing is, it seems like it takes a long time to boot up, and I don't remember it taking this long to boot up before. Like, I'll get in the car, start driving, and my phone just seems to take forever to pair up. And when it starts to download contacts, a lot of times it disconnects the phone, and then it has to repair again. It's just some weird stuff with Bluetooth going on here that I didn't see in the other Mazda cars. But overall, the touchscreen works well when you're at a stop. The mapping software works well. All of the software in it is pretty stable, and I think most people are going to like the simplicity of it. Now, getting around is pretty quick. You have applications, music, and the EQ settings and all that stuff for the Bose system in here is pretty good. This is above average in terms of sound quality when you really start comparing it to most other brands. I think you're going to like the sound system. The phone control is easy. Navigation is pretty quick. Overall, to zoom and to pan out, you can go to 2D mode, 3D mode, and you zoom in and out with the central command controller, and you can kind of slide around with your finger as well. But mostly when you get into the settings, there's a lot of other things here to control, like your heads-up display. And again, you turn it off and it turns right back on. Another bug they haven't fixed. The one thing I'm going to talk about with the safety systems here is the blind spot monitoring. And this car, I don't know if it's an issue with the programming or hardware, but it is so overly sensitive. I could be starting side by side with a car. I could be about 10 car lengths in front, turn on my turn signal, and it still thinks the car's behind me. And if you have the audio alerts on in here, it's gonna drive you crazy because it false alerts you so often that there's a car next to you and there's not. I think the margin for error there, they've programmed it, at least on this car, way too sensitive, and I find I have to turn it off, so it's something you're gonna wanna test. Now the back seat space might be important to you. This is where you're gonna put your loved ones. Or if you have a friend that's a bodybuilder that breeds Pomeranians, you're gonna need a lot of space for all those things back here. And for the most part, the bottom cushion and the back cushion are extremely comfortable. Now this isn't going to reward an NBA player in terms of size. The headroom's good, but overall, this is another aspect of a vehicle where you really have to go down there and look at it. Along, as I said, with the back cargo area, this is another spot that's gonna be a make it or break it type area, but I think overall, it's an extremely comfortable space. And the passengers I've had in here have had literally no complaints, despite them being a little bit taller. So what's the conclusion with the CX-5? I think if you get the chance to look at it, put it at one of the top to look at on your shopping list. Because Mazda as a brand does not have the leeway that some of the other manufacturers do to let little details slide. This is an important product for them. It is an important car, and you can see that in terms of drivability, steering, mechanical, interior and exterior design. It's one of the most well-rounded cars because they need this car to sell. They need people to like it and recommend it to other people to get their sales numbers up. This is keeping the lights on for them, and the amount of work and time they put into it definitely shows. Now, there are areas where they can improve, of course. I'm not a big fan of some of their technology implementations. To me, this vehicle rides a little bit softer than the previous CX-5, and it kind of hurts the fun to drive aspect of it. You don't have a higher performance motor in it. It's not the fastest in the segment. It doesn't have the most room. It doesn't have panoramic sunroof and a lot of the fluff that some of the competitors do. But overall, it's one of the best, if not the best, cohesive package from the ground up. And what you get for the price is extremely impressive. That's why I recommend it pretty much as one of the first to look at if you're shopping for something like this. One of the weirdest things about this back seat is it has these releases where you can easily unplug the seat heater controls and throw this whole bottom cushion out. Now, the benefit of that is, well, it gives you more of a flat surface, but I don't really know what the hell you're gonna do with that, other than throw this out the fucking door. You son of a bitch. That's what I get for finding these little things. The this thing back in here. Ugh, fucking son of a bitch. I don't know why it's like this. Ugh. The f do you put this thing back in there?